So welcome everyone to the Meaningful Movement podcast. This is the 8th episode, and I'm Seth Dellinger, and I'm really happy to be here with Haidee Stairmand. And she is a yoga teacher in Auckland, New Zealand. And she teaches both to the general public, but she is also part of the Contemporary School of Yoga. So she is also a trainer of other yoga teachers. In addition to teaching yoga, you are a teacher of Hanna Somatics. Which bears some relationship to what I do, teaching the Feldenkrais method. Maybe we'll get to that. But probably we should also say that you love anatomy, and you were just telling me that you hope to be an anatomist when you grow up, but it seems like you're quite the anatomist already. So welcome, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here and connect after a couple of years of kind of connecting online, virtually, and listening to you. I got to listen to your voice before you got to hear my voice.
That's right. So I'm figuring out your accent, but so far I'm doing okay. And yeah, we've known each other online, and I was just thinking of talking to you today and just looking over some of your posts. And I was just struck by a few things. But one of the things that you underline in many places is just this idea of lifelong learning. So maybe we could just start by getting a sort of an overview of your path. I think it began with yoga, but I don't know, maybe it began before that in terms of, what led you to what you're doing today.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's really, and I think I've picked that thing up from Moshe Feldenkrais, of that constant life is about, it's an adventure, isn't it? And it's that whole thing of you continually learning, refining, taking stuff in, spitting stuff out, letting stuff go, bringing stuff in. And I find that really satisfying, that lifelong learning. And I have to actually kind of watch myself that I don't take in too much information and too much learning without having time to integrate it and put it into practice. But I absolutely love learning about stuff. And what I find really cool, and why I've kind of got that when I grow up, I want to be an anatomist dream. And I'll just fake it till I make it. I'll just be it till I get that bit of paper on the wall or whatever. Is because the human body, for me, and especially the human body in movement, is so fascinating. It's like you can learn, like I love muscles and the whole idea about how muscles, just so fine sensing organs, and that you can learn about something and then, go back and have a look at it, and it just blows your mind all over again, and you'll learn something completely different or something new, or just wherever you are in your life, it just seems to open up a whole lot of new things for you about stuff. So blood for me and fluid in the body is one of the most incredible things. I still really haven't got my head around the whole idea of blood and its connective tissue, and you just kind of go, oh, cool, I think I've got it. And then you go away and you do your thing and you come back and you hear something else and it puts you back into it. And then you're like, oh, I don't know anything about it. Actually, I thought I knew a whole lot. And now it's like, I've got a whole 100 other things to kind of investigate. So I think that's what really hooked me into anatomy, was that you can just constantly find freshness with it, and it's just evergreen, and it just keeps on bringing me back in. It just keeps on sucking me back in. So how I got started with yoga specifically was pain brought me to yoga. I've always had really chronic lower back pain from being a teenager. I can't ever remember a time where I didn't have lower back pain. And so I started yoga when I was, I think, pregnant with my first son, because of course lower back gets a little bit sore. And it was great. It gave me some sort of relief. So I just carried on practicing it and sort of started, that's how it hooked me in. And I never thought more than what my one yoga class a week or my 2 yoga classes a week were, but it was like, oh, it gives me relief from pain and chronic pain. So this is what kind of hooked me back in, and I just kind of kept going from that, and it's developed. And I think I started practicing yoga in 2000. I was thinking about this the other day, in 2001, before I had kids. And that was really fleeting. I went with my partner and he laughed the whole time and farted and did all that kind of stuff. And so it wasn't that enjoyable. And then when I made it sort of my own practice and it was quite a personal thing, I'm like, oh, I can see why people kind of really into this stuff. There's something about it. And I found a really great teacher in a big gym chain here. And I was like, oh, cool. I don't want to do anything else in the gym except for yoga now. And so I just started going to her classes, and going to classes that weren't in a gym were vastly different than classes that were in a gym. And I think lots of the esoteric stuff in yoga pulled me in, that there's kind of all this fascinating stuff about prana and, you know, the energy body and the kind of mind body thing that goes on. And yeah, that started me off on my yoga practice.
Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming if you started when you were pregnant, that the form of yoga that you were practicing was probably not incredibly intense in terms of the positions or whatnot. What was it like for you? Because we were joking, you know, before we hit record on this conversation, how yoga, that word could mean so many things at this point. But I'm just kind of curious, what was your initial impression of what this form of movement actually was?
Yeah, good question. So I started before, really briefly before I was pregnant, and then that's when I started my proper kind of more what's the word for it, constant practice. And yeah, it was pretty slow, and we're kind of doing stretches at the wall and just making space and all that kind of stuff. So my initial impression of what yoga was is that it was a movement based practice, and that you're kind of doing all these movements, and we're doing a bit of stretching. And now I know lots of stuff about stretching, so what I did in those first classes, I might not do them or be that willing to do them now. But I think the big takeaway was that word space. It was just giving my body space, and it was giving me space in my week, and it was just allowing that whole idea of being. So the practice was a movement practice, but within there was something really, it's really bizarre, isn't it? Within moving, you find that thing of stillness and space within the movement. And my favorite part was always the resting part at the end. It's like I never miss an opportunity to lie down. So it's and that kind of, and now I understand the benefit of that lying down part at the end as well. So yeah, yoga for me, and even when I started going quite regularly to my first teacher, I thought it was a movement practice. It's like, oh, we're doing yoga, you know, we're making shapes and we're doing this and we're breathing. But I didn't know about the other more subtle layers of it. So movement is what brought me into the practice, basically, and what brought me into my body, I guess.
So at this point, is movement practice, in your mind, too narrow a definition of yoga? What's it become for you?
So movement, yeah, what's it about now? So movement's definitely a big part of it, because humans, well, what I think and what I kind of understand is human bodies are designed to move. All of our kind of parts are designed for movement, and your body loves movement. But there's, I think, probably the biggest branch on the yoga tree is movement, and especially in the current kind of the way we practice it, especially in Western culture, or where I live in New Zealand, it's movement. But there's the movement's kind of like the door you walk through, isn't it? And then you look into the room and, oh, there's some other subtle stuff. Oh, there's breathing, and there's being, and there's like the emotions, and then there's mind. And so there's all those kind of koshik, those layers to the body. But I think it was easier for me to start from a movement place, because I was, to be still was really freaky for me. It was quite hard work to kind of lie down, close your eyes, and kind of shut up. It was like, whoa, there's lots going on in my brain, there's lots going on in my body, lots of sensations. So I still think movement's a big part of the practice, but it's not all of it. So it's probably quite a tasty part, but you've got those little flavors that come from those other subtle things that add in the other textures, add that variety to it.
Mm-hmm. You wrote something on your website about finding yoga helped you find your place in the world.
Wow, did I? That's quite profound, isn't it?
Yes, apparently you said so.
I wonder what the context was. Yeah, well, it gives you I think it gave me that, and especially meditation, and the lineage of meditation that I've kind of gone right into is integrative restoration, which is that whole idea of being. So it's like I can, you know, I'm this, and I've got a car, and I've got these clothes, and I've got all this stuff, but that's is that who I am, and is that what I think I am, or is it this kind of underlying part of me that's always been there? It's always just kind of hanging out. And I think that gives you, well, that's given me, I speak for myself, it's given me a real solidness to be in my body when, especially when times are easy, it's, you know, things are easy, but when times get rough, it's like to be able to come back and have almost that anchor back into that being has been really, really helpful for me. And I think that's probably where that statement's come from, is it's giving me a place in the world to be who I am, to be okay with who I am, and to be able to be passionate about stuff, and also encourage and help other people find that in themselves as well. I think is kind of my duty in this lifetime, is be me, be who I am, kind of do that, and give that permission to other people to do that as well. And find their own passions and whatever that is for them.
What you're talking about in terms of an anchor, it brings me back to that comment you made earlier about how, at least initially, to just close your eyes and be quiet was actually very difficult. Is that related to what you're talking about here?
Yeah, there'd be a thread there, wouldn't there? Because I think the more able you are to be with yourself, so be in that inner kind of body, that inner landscape or whatever, it means that I'm kind of losing my track of thought here, but what am I trying to spit out? That if you can be with yourself, then you can be with most other things as well. It's kind of that, does that answer the question? Is that, I don't know, I'm just kind of talking now. Pull me in, otherwise we might go off into a blood cell or something like that. Yeah, I guess so. For me, I remember the first time I ever did yoga nidra, and I closed my eyes, and my eyes were bouncing around like under my eyelids, and I was almost it was like I had a battle with myself, like, oh, stop that shouldn't be happening, you're trying to rest, just lie down, you know, make the most of it. And now I know that was my nervous system actually talking to me and going, hang on, there's a lot of stuff in your brain. Before we lie down and chill out, we just might need to sort out some of the stuff up the front of the brain or whatever it is. So I remember that being really, really vivid. And I think in a way I pushed away that more quiet element of practicing or meditating for quite a few years, because it was a bit not scary, but it was kind of like, I can't be bothered, you know, I'm not any good at meditating, or I'm not any good at kind of lying down and being still or moving slowly or whatever that means. It wasn't until I felt that my body had kind of gone through the motions, you know, in a way of movement, that it was able then to actually be quite quiet and kind of come to that place of stillness. And we know the body's never still. There's always stuff, there's always blood moving around, there's always lymph flowing somewhere. So but it's that whole thing of kind of, thinking's great, thinking's the language of the mind, but it's that I often think of that thing, don't get caught in it. It's like, what else is there? It's kind of like, you can be up in your thoughts, but what's behind that? Can you sit back and kind of just have a good look at them, like a movie, I guess?
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like, from what you're talking about, it's actually, if you do move, if you do explore different shapes, it actually gives more possibility to then come back to a quieter and stiller place, because maybe there's a internal movement that's always happening, as you say, the blood or other just internal mechanisms that are always going. But if they're happening inside of a static, it's maybe not a good word, but it's the one that comes to mind, like inside a static shell of the body, then there's a kind of almost an internal anxiety of the body.
Yeah, all that rigid, like I think of people, and it would have been myself as well, there's the kind of like a holding, like a body holding, isn't there? To, like, if I just hold it in and I keep all my shit together, literally, and I'm kind of rigid, then everything's safe, right? It's like, well, we're all here. And so by those, like, exploring movements and all different ways to move, and putting, you know, your attention in your hip socket or up in your top of your spine or whatever, it starts to free up your body systems, and there tends to be like a freeing up in the mind. Not that there's a separation. I mean, tell me where the brain ends and the body begins. It doesn't happen like that, but that whole thing of, I guess it's intellect, isn't it, or our consciousness. It's like once you can move and be kind of moving and your body's quite free to move and feel stable and whatever, then there tends to be that quality that comes up into your awareness as well. So yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why it's really important when people, from like a trauma sensitive point of view as well, if you have someone that comes along and they've got heaps, I mean, we've all got our stuff, we've all got our baggage, but some people maybe just have slightly bigger suitcases than other people full of stuff as well. That to get someone, oh, just sit down, relax, take a few deep breaths, that can be like not okay for most people. And so I think that's where that movement stuff comes in. It's like, can I move it through my system, da 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 da, and then I might be ready, if I want to kind of sit down and spend some time in stillness or integrating or whatever the word is, or however that works out.
You mentioned trauma, and I know that you're actually specifically trained in teaching yoga for people who've experienced trauma. But you know, and at the same time, I agree with what you say. We all bring our stuff to the experience. But what has it been like for you as a teacher, you know, to help people to see the value in slowing down when maybe initially it's frightening to them? What are some of the, I mean, I don't know if it's a question of techniques, but what are the kinds of dialogues that unfold with people, you know, that can help people cross over to the other side, so to speak?
Cross over to the light side, the dark light side. Yeah, I in my experience, from what I've seen, that's helped people I've worked with and also myself, self-touch seems to be quite a helpful one. So, you know, put your hand on your shoulder, for example, and move your shoulder back and forward. Feel how your shoulder moves. You know, light massaging around the jaw or around the neck, or just even hands on like your lower ribs as you're breathing. If you're lying down and breathing, or standing up as you're breathing, has been really, really helpful for myself and for other people, because we know the hand gets a lot of space in the top of the brain there. So wherever your hand is, your brain's normally listening to what your hand's doing. And after all that, the last year or so that we've all been through, where we're in kind of quite a touch poor culture now, and people are a little bit afraid of touch as well. I'm a big believer in, you've got hands, you've got a body, put them on yourself and start to explore. And that can even be with like gentle massaging of like muscles, or, you know, using like soft balls to massage places. And it just brings, I guess, you're going to have some fluid exchange when you massage as well, and do that kind of trigger point stuff. And you're bringing greater awareness to the area. So it's that feeling thing again. It's like, if I can feel it, I can move it. If I can move it, I can feel it. And if I can feel it, I'll probably start to play with it and change it as well. So that's been a big one. Or giving people lots of choice as well in movement, I think is really helpful. So it's not like, oh, we're coming along, we've got to do it exactly this way, and your foot's got to be here and your arm's got to be here and everyone's got to look the same in the shape. I'm not into that at all. There's certain principles and shapes that we kind of in, but I like to give people lots of freedom, because I think if you've come from somewhere where you've had some insults in your life, or you've had some trauma, your sense of choice and freedom starts to get taken away from you, or you don't feel like you can make a choice about stuff anymore. So you've had that kind of power has gone out to some external kind of thing or person. So choice for movement. And I don't think it's a prerequisite that people have to ever meditate or be still, because it's, for some people, just not for them. But like you mentioned, slowing down, I think there's a real power in slowing down. Because if we can, especially when it comes to looking how the body moves, if you can slow movements down and you can control them with ease, then when you need to go fast, you've got all those options and those possibilities for movement. But going fast is really fun sometimes as well. We all need to kind of run sometimes. And so it's not, again, not getting stuck in what's best or what's worse or good or bad. It's like, can I encourage slowing down in my own life through movement, and how does that feed out into my daily life, which is, again, really interesting, isn't it? It's like, how do our movement practices go out and kind of help us to be humans out in the world with other people? And I think learning to slow down is a big part of that. It's take time. It's like, take time before you move your arm, move it really slowly. It's take time before you react to that person that's cut in front of you in the queue at the supermarket or whatever. Yeah, so it's those, I'm interested in those parallels of slowing down and how does that affect everything else in your life, basically.
Mm-hmm. Do you see yourself as acting differently in the world than you did, say, 10 years ago before you were so immersed in this practice?
You might need to ask my family.
Well, that's cheating.
But
I'll do that.
yeah, totally. Because you never, I mean, we all have our little view of ourselves, but we never really see ourselves as other people see us. So, but and that's irrelevant how other people see you as well. I think it's really important that you're okay with your own personal view back into your inner landscape, but totally different because I now move differently. I'm out of chronic pain, which is, if you've ever had long-term pain, you act differently out in the world. It's really, you've got less energy. You don't kind of want to get involved in as much stuff. That was my experience. You're always cautious of where you're going to go in case those 4 flights of stairs, my back's going to give out or whatever. So I think I act very differently in the world. I would like to think that I have adapted and I've evolved into a better version of Haidee. And it's ongoing. Life is just this kind of constant cycle. So I look forward to seeing what I might be like in 5 or 10 years. I actually look forward to that process of aging as well, because I think it gives you a fresh place to move from, to live from, and to be really kind of curious about as well. So yeah, the answer to that would be yes. I think I'm quite different out in the world now. If your shoulder starts to free up, then everything's going to start to free up in your body. Yeah.
Right. But so in your earlier years of practice, was pain still, part of the experience? How did you, because one of the things that I always try to get to in these podcasts, and everyone has a different perspective and story, but since you mentioned, working through pain, I think that whether your practice is yoga or Feldenkrais or some kind of athletics, there's so many different kinds of practice, but the word practice itself, at least in my mind, it means you keep showing up, right? It means that you're consistent over time, and sure, we all have, better days than others, but what was your experience like in terms of, before getting to the point of being pain-free, to continue just the commitment to the practice and to keep going?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? I would get relief from, so it was my lower sacral pain, basically, was probably what it was, or sacral joint pain, that I would get maybe a day's relief from a yoga class, and I would try and replicate what I'd done. And it's really hard to try and do yoga when you don't know, you're not a teacher, because you're like, I don't know where to start, and I kind of remember this, but I'm not sure. So I'd get like a day's relief, and then that pain would come back. And some of the things that I was doing in yoga, in retrospect, in my yoga practice before I became a teacher, I now know were probably reinforcing that pain cycle or that pain map in my body. The whole thing of going deeper, go more. There's always that next level you have to get to in the asana, the shape in yoga. Open your hips up a little bit more, get a little bit deeper into that back bend. Those things for me weren't helpful in retrospect. So I've got quite flexible joints in my body, but I have quite tight muscular tonus. And I was realizing that with those really deep passive stretches, I was pulling basically my body apart. I remember being in a forward fold one time in class and thinking, if I just straighten my legs a little bit more till I kind of feel that little pop at the back of my knees, that's going to be really good. That's what I'm after. And the next day I woke up and I remember I looked and my back of my knees were all bruised because I'd just gone too deep into a forward fold. And my like inner being now is just like, oh, what were you doing? Like, and so it's that's why I'm really passionate when I come to teaching. I'm not into the end. You can go and do the splits or handstands, whatever, deep back bends. That's cool. But in my class, I'm really interested in keeping everything nice and stable, just encouraging that little bit of free movement, working out where your limitations are, and not going to your end range. So staying out of like that whole idea. And I heard someone say it the other day, and I think it was my teacher Suds. He said, if you're using pain to get out of pain, you've got to have a really good look at that. And that's really stuck with me the last couple of months since he said it. And it's so true. And it's like we go and because I think in our society, our modern society, it's that whole thing of work harder, push more, keep going, got to work harder, even if you're tired. And in New Zealand, we say something called harden up, suck it up, harden up. And it's absolute, it's not true. It's like, actually, if you soften and you yield and you become easeful, things become easier and life becomes easier. And I'm really interested in making life easier and not harder. And that's just personally for me. So that comes back to the movement. My movement practice is, can I make things easier? Can I find a more efficient way of moving? And then my nervous system goes, whoa, this is nice. Cool. We'll take those patterns out into everything else we do. So yeah, I think I was using pain to get out of pain. And it wasn't until I had an understanding of the body systems, and also when I first did my yoga teacher training in 2013 with Carla Brody, Neil Goshal, and some other teachers there. I remember going to the first class. We did the class in the morning when we first arrived, and I'm like, whoa, that was yoga, but that was not like yoga I've ever practiced before in my life. There was something really easeful about it, lots of choices, and I'm like, whoa, my body feels pretty good after that as well. So yeah, that pushing thing, there's times in life to push, if you get your boundary stepped over, you're going to want to push back on people or things, but most of the time it's that idea of yielding. So it's like, can I just kind of yield into it, and like a piece of seaweed, it just moves in the water, find that gentle bit of flow. If I become too rigid, it's just going to fall off, and then those things I know aren't helpful or useful to me at this time anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting though that you place such an emphasis now on finding that easefulness and not pushing, and yet it sounds like that was your experience in yoga for a long time, and yet you did continue to the point of coming to this training where suddenly you discovered a different style. And I want to be very careful with any broad brushstrokes, because already, as we said, yoga has so many forms and there's so many different teachers and approaches, and it whenever I'm talking to someone about yoga, I kind of feel like I have to spend some time saying, well, what do you mean by yoga? Because it could be so many things. But among the things that, do come up in conversation are stories like the one you told. And, in terms of the work that I do, I've had clients who come to me often as a result of how they've practiced yoga. And then, they come looking, and I'm just curious about, because now you're involved in training other yoga teachers, what do you think is going on with some of the teachers who are saying, yeah, you could just go a little deeper? And what, because as you said in your story, and I think for many people, the assumption is when I walk into the movement class, well, the teacher knows more than I do. So probably the best thing to do would be to follow the instructions. And some people will come into a class and have a little bit more of a reservation, and they will pause after hearing the directions and think, well, let me see if I want to follow those directions or not. But many people are just going to, teacher said so, so it's like, let me do it. And, that can sometimes be a moment where real difficulties arise.
Yeah, totally. So you've hit a thing on the head there, and with lots of movement stuff is there's a power dynamic, right? There's me as the teacher that knows more than the students or whatever. And I think you've got to be really careful and also hold that really humbly, that you have a power dynamic. No matter what happens, you're still the teacher and they're still the student, and there's always going to be that little bit of play. And I've had students come to my classes and they've said, oh, can you just correct me when I do something wrong? And in the back of my mind, I go, ha, 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 no, I'm not going to be doing that. And then I say, yeah, sure, but I'll give you some modifications and there'll be lots of options and you can pick from those. Because then there's also that other end of the spectrum where you say to someone, oh, just do what feels good. Well, when I had really chronic pain in my body, I was doing what I thought felt good, but it wasn't actually that helpful for my system at the time. So it's like, how do I keep in one hand what I know and what I think I know and what I've experienced, and offer that as like a container that people move in or practice in? And also, how do I skillfully give people lots of space, lots of choice, but also we're still kind of all doing the same sort of thing at the same kind of time? And I'm totally cool if someone comes into a class or into a practice and they want to just do their own thing. And if it's safe for them and it's not, then cool, they can go for it. I'm totally happy. And I always try to say at the beginning of most of my classes, if we do something and it doesn't feel right in part of your body, then feel free to modify, and I'll give you some options. But like if someone walks in and their shoulders a little bit tight, moving their arm like this is not going to be helpful above their head. So it's also giving them permission and showing and languaging for everyone as well that you might just want to leave your arm here today. And then that's really cool because we're getting into some different fibers around the shoulder. We don't always have to have the arms in that full movement. So I think teachers that are encouraging students to go deeper, it's just like a different flavor of ice cream, isn't it? Some people want the chili chocolate ice cream. They want a bit of extra spice in it. Cool. My question to the people that practice and teach like that is, are you generally pain-free in your own body? Are your students generally pain-free in their bodies? If the answer is yes, cool. Then how you're teaching and how you're practicing is right. If you're getting all these weird aches and pains, or you're getting a hip replacement as a yoga teacher, or you're getting chronic back pain, etc., we could go through the list of things, then my question would be perhaps how you're practicing yoga or your movement is not that helpful for you at the time. Because you can go deeper, but there's only going to be a certain point and there's nowhere else to go in the shape. Start breaking bones or pulling joints apart, and some people want to do that and that's completely fine. But for me, I actually, for the rest of my life, I want to be able to walk around well, and I want to walk upstairs with my knees and my hips that are my own. So that's what's really interesting to me, is keeping all the tissues nice and healthy, nice and movable, and making sure that I don't end up with my shoulders all pulled forward and really tight chest muscles as well. So I think the big change in direction was my original yoga practice, where we explored lots of body-mind centering principles as well. So that interoceptive movement practice, rather than, the teacher's telling me to do this and I've got to get my knee directly over that and my hips have got to be squared off. Because people will come in and they're like, oh, that must be the correct way to practice yoga. The teacher said it. So it's a really fine line, isn't it? It's like you can teach from a contemporary point of view, but you've got to also kind of ask yourself, these people will probably be going to other classes as well. So can I give them the tools, the skills, and the self-agency that they can make choices within other classes where they may not feel that great in some movements, and they can just make them smaller or change what they're doing or modify them.
So I'm not sure if this is going to be a detour to another place or if this will just embellish what we're already talking about, but where or when or how did the more intense interest in anatomy come in? And what I'm curious about is the thing that it seems almost kind of too obvious to state it, but I mean, when you're talking about blood, or you're talking about fascia, or you're talking about things we can't see from the outside, right? So it's all in there. And when you tell me how to arrange my limbs to be in the yoga pose, you know, maybe my first thought isn't about the internal state of my anatomy, but it seems like you've found that study has embellished and made your practice richer, and maybe for your students as well.
I like that word, embellishment. That's a good word. That'll be my word of the week. Thank you. I'll take that one. So how I initially, I really don't know. It was sort of like divine, I don't know, something happened. And I think it's because of the love of anatomy from my initial yoga training, that all the teachers had their own take on anatomy, and especially our anatomy teacher, she just had a really light way of just explaining, and she really encouraged us to go out and explore it for ourselves as well. So I think that's the little ember that sparked that fire in me. It was like, whoa, this thing is, and I wanted to be an astronomer when I was a kid. And so the inner world is like the outer cosmos. It really is. It's, you know, if you look inside a cell, this is like looking out into the vast edges of the known universe. And I would probably challenge you on the fact that we can see our blood from the outside, and we can see our fascia from the outside.
Okay.
So anywhere you look in the body, you're just looking at basically where the heart's reached out to, aren't you? And there's blood right out to the very edges of your skin. You cut your finger, you'll know all about that pretty quickly, how close that blood is to the edge of that skin. And yes, the skin is dead cells, but they were still, you know, they were still part of the fascia at some point, and they just made their way out to the edge there. So anatomy for me has really, really enriched my practice and my teaching, because not only is it more, I always think humans, we're quite narcissistic, right? We like knowing about ourselves. So when you learn about anatomy, you're learning about yourself. I'm like, who wouldn't want to know about how their heart moves blood around their body? Like, and some people are not into it, but I think if you put it in that way, like, hey, let's have a look at the hip socket. The hip socket's this beautiful, smooth, you know, it's got all this lovely glidey, slidey surfaces. And so when you're doing this movement in yoga or walking up the stairs or whatever, can you imagine the slidey, glidey surfaces? And I think that's where that enrichment of movement comes from. Is it's not, I'm just this kind of meat suit walking around with this head attached to the top of it, and the brain's doing everything. It's like, hang on, no, your big toe is just as intelligent as the top of your head or the front of your brain or whatever. So the love of anatomy for me, I've always been someone that's quite curious, and I like to ask questions. So as a child, I had this amazing book. It was called How Is It Done? And it told you how stripes got in toothpaste and how bars of soap are made. And I just found this stuff fascinating. Like, where does all the rubbish go in the world? As a kid, I remember thinking, like, does no one care about this stuff? Like, where's it all going? It's going somewhere. Well, now people do care. But I've just had this sort of insatiable curiosity about things. So when I started to look into anatomy, I was like, I'm never going to get to the end of knowing about this thing. And this is what's really satisfying to me, is it's just this constant, you know, fascia, because it's kind of that cool thing to talk about now. But it's like, what is fascia? Where is it? It's like, well, it's everything, but it's not everything, but it connects everything, but it separates everything. And it's, you can just have a field day, and you can write your own story within what we know, because the whole word anatomy is to pull apart, isn't it? And that comes back to our kind of industrialized viewpoint of the world. We can just pull everything apart and put it all together and make machines, and the body's a machine. And, you know, one day your hip's going to wear out and your knee's going to wear out and you're going to get old. And it's not true, because we're a whole body, and we've got a organizing force for us that no one really knows what it is, which is kind of what Thomas Hanna talked about, wasn't it? It's like the soma is the body of life, and once you're dead, your body's still there, but you're not there anymore, and the life of the body's not there. So what is what is the living body? It's like, that's a big question, just like what is yoga? And I don't think those two are mutually exclusive either. And I just find it fascinating how in some of the yoga practices that are, you know, Nadi Shodhana, for example, that alternate nostril breathing, that they worked out these things that modern science is only just working out, that one nasal passage is a little bit more full and one nasal passage is a little bit more open every few hours. And I think that's the skill, isn't it? If you can really start to and kind of be in your own body and start to really get sensitive to processes and sensations, that you can start to work out some pretty cosmic stuff about your body and give it lots of space and have things that just work themselves out. Or if you've got a fallen over and grazed your knee or whatever it is, it's like, oh, wow, look at that bruise starting to be cleared up by those macrophages. Look at that skin starting to just knit itself back together. And once you know those processes and the body's just continually self knitting back and self-healing, then it's like, amazing. What can't my body do? It can do everything, but I've also got to give it lots of time to not do anything and rest and drink lots of water and do all those kind of things to support all those processes. So yeah, anatomy is, and I mean, muscles are just these incredible sense organs that, you know, you only need to think about moving your head to the right and all these muscles in your neck and elsewhere have already started to kind of, they've jumped ahead of you before you've even thought about it, and they're like ready to do the movement for you. And so I think what we know about the body is so limited, and it means that the future is so exciting for people like myself that are kind of body explorers, that we can just start to put things together and make new connections. And yes, I can't prove it with science or anything, but I can prove it with feeling and my own experience of what's happening. And it becomes like a manual. Yeah, you just find out more about yourself. And I'm totally into that. I'm totally narcissistic. I want to find out more about myself. And it's like no one gives you a manual when you're born into a body, do they? And like kind of, this is how it works and this is what's good and this is what's bad. And I think we tend to focus a lot on pathology and how the body. We've done lots of research on the breakdown of the body. We haven't done a lot of research, and we don't put a lot of emphasis on how amazing the body is and how much stuff it's actually doing at any 1 second of the day. And it's just doing it all without you even thinking about it. But once you put your brain into it, there's going to be some pretty cool stuff that might start to happen.
Yeah, there's a real sense of wonder that comes through in the way that you're talking about the anatomy. And you describe yourself as a body explorer, but then, you know, I think a lot of people are exactly, well, I don't want to say exactly the opposite, but anatomy isn't necessarily a standard, part of the curriculum in a lot of schooling that people get. I mean, I know it's different around the world, and maybe your experience in New Zealand is different than what I had growing up, but certainly to the degree that I did study the body, you know, I remember taking the biology classes in high school, but it wasn't this alive kind of like revelation about this is what's inside of me, this is how I work. I mean, perhaps for my biology teacher it was, and maybe I was just a jaded teenager and I couldn't quite get it. But for sure, my capacity to digest anatomy, which, you know, another thing you could say about it, I guess some people love this part, but other people get scared away, is there's just this incredible complexity to it, right? And so I think for many people, it's easy to kind of throw your hands up and say, well, there's no way I'll be able to digest all of that. But to learn anatomy through movement, you know, in other words, it's not just the textbook, but it's, you know, here's a picture of your lung, and now we're going to breathe, and we're going to imagine the alveoli, and, you know, those kinds of things. I think it can just gives people a little more of a grasp and to see, you know, what this does for me. And it allows us also to explore with our imagination. I mean, it might be that I'll never quite have the exact picture of my hip joint, but the more that I learn about it and I hear people describe it, and I, you know, when I'm practicing a Feldenkrais, process related to the hip joint, my eyes are closed, but in my head, there's a kind of a picture that I have that I'm trying to form. I think the ball of the femur is like this, and I think the acetabulum is like that, and I think they're relating in this way. And I'm kind of checking what I'm thinking against the sensations that are actually coming from my hip, and I'm kind of bouncing back and forth and working in that way. But I think that's an opportunity that maybe many people never encounter in the realm of anatomy, and they just see the complexity, and maybe some are drawn in, but others kind of get turned off by that.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's that whole thing of elitism, isn't it? It's that it was made complex because it is complex. The anatomy is complex, but it was made complex because you had these people with these degrees, and they understand kind of like that teacher-student dynamic again, and I'll never be able to know that, and they know so much. And really, is it important to know all the muscle attachments and insertions, or is it more important to know and feel how things move together and how it's easy to move? So I would say yes to both of those questions. And I think that's what scares people with anatomy, especially when I teach it on our teacher training as well. When I'm coming in, we're doing breathing in the lungs this afternoon or whatever, and people are like, I'm really scared, I'm really bad at anatomy. And I think it's because they've had those experiences in their younger life, or some people have been through medical school, and it's this really rote memorization thing that starts to have to happen, which is important. It's very important to know the names of some things. And sometimes I read the name and I make up my own pronunciation, and I say it, and people are like, what are you saying? And like, da-da-da. And they're like, oh, that's not that. And I said, but you knew what I was saying though, right? So it's kind of, and it's Latin and it's another language, and there's all that kind of thing to it as well. But so for me, it's like, because I'm so passionate about it, and I know the value of knowing anatomy for not only teaching, but also your own personal movement stuff, I try and make it fun, so that when we talk about fascia, we dissect the mandarin, and we, that you have a look at it and all that kind of thing. Because I think in high school, when I did biology, I refused. I was an animal activist at that time, and I refused to do it because we were cutting up like cows' eyeballs. And it's this thing of, and now I'd be totally into it, but it's this thing of, it's a piece of, you've taken something away from the body, and now you're expecting someone to get excited and cut it up. And probably the only people that's going to get excited is the person that's going to be a surgeon later on in life or whatever, rather than show people an eyeball, a picture, get someone to draw it, get them to feel it, have a look at the fluid or whatever it is around it, look at the nerves and the muscles that attach to it, and then give them that experience of the thing. Because we are living in bodies, we are bodies. It's like there's never a better place to study something than in the real time, and you've got it all just at your fingertips, literally, that you can explore. So I think some of the more mysterious stuff, like is harder for people to grasp. Like lungs are kind of a bit weird because you kind of don't feel them move. You feel your rib cage move and you feel your diaphragm move, but you don't really feel your lung move, do you? But you could feel your lung move. And I guess the same thing with blood, is blood's kind of, and lots of people have that squeamish thing about blood, which is totally fine. That's all just talks to the vagus nerve doing its thing and saying, oh, just be careful of that. You can't really experience blood moving. Well, you probably can, but you're using, like you said, your imagination. This is humans, our greatest skill is to imagine stuff. I mean, everything that we use, someone's just imagined it. And so it's like, can we take that skill of imagining into our body? And then there's that, and I think they have shown that the brain just lights up as well when we put our attention, like you said, with the hip socket thing. It's like you've got that image. And what I'm really interested in is the image, and it's almost at some point I want to get the image, I want to lose the image and actually just get the pure sensory feeling of the area. The image is helpful, but for me, I can actually get caught up in the image a little bit of, oh, this is da-da-da, and it's like, hang on, that might not be actually the reality of it. But I really want a full body x-ray so I can see all my joints. My hip socket, I had an x-ray of my lungs last year, and I said to the doctor, I need a copy. And he's like, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm just really into anatomy. And he's like, okay. So no one asked for a copy of their lung x-ray. I'm like, okay, now what's this part? What's this part? What's this part? And it was just so cool to see. I'm like, wow, the lungs really do grow right up to that first rib and a little bit above. And because you can't kind of feel it, someone tells you it, but until you see it, and it's like, that's my body. And then, now I can really start to embody that whole idea of where the bits and pieces are. And my friend's son had a hockey stick to his face the other day and did some damage to the orbit, the eye socket. And she sent me this beautiful picture, and you could see his brain just so perfectly in the skull, just like it's just made for the thing, it's just this perfect. And I was like, that's so beautiful. If people could see their brains, they might not actually go and play rugby and do things that give them concussion. Yeah, because now you're like, this thing is just so beautiful and well made. Why the hell would I go slam it around on the floor and to other people's knees? I don't know. So maybe that's where that whole thing of kind of a slower, easier movement practice. But you're still, you're still building heat, and we're still moving and getting all that strength in the body as well, is because you know what these structures look like, and you know how delicate and fine some of these ligaments around the shoulder are. And it's like, so why would I want to do 20 chaturanga dandasana movements in one class when I know for myself, my shoulders aren't stable enough to support me without kind of hanging out in some of these ligaments through the front of my chest here. So it's kind of, if you could look into your body, I think you might treat it quite differently.
Do you bring anatomy into your teaching when you're not in the teacher training and you're just teaching the general public? Are there some sort of maybe more entry-level pieces of anatomy that you find really help people when they learn certain things about their bodies?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I could teach a movement class without talking about anatomy. And that's just because that's my bias, that's my passion. It depends on what mood I'm in. And I normally, whatever I'm looking at out in the world, and nature's really inspiring to me as well, because we see those parallels of anatomy in nature, like we've got, what ferns are, right? They're those plants that open up like that and unfurl from like a little spiral. It's like, well, there's your spine in utero, and that's it unfurling or whatever. So I think the entry points that I use for people is it's more of that structure and anatomical structures. So I find people find it quite easy to form a relationship with muscles, because we've already got in our culture that, when you see the anatomy person, the other person standing without the skin and all their muscles all shiny and red or whatever. So we kind of have that idea of a skeleton and muscles. And so I think entry for people is the skeleton and muscles. And because we're moving, and you can normally feel some muscles moving, if you clench your buttocks, you're going to feel it start to tighten or clench or whatever. So I think that's a really cool entry point for people. And then you can start to go a little bit deeper into like connective tissue. I'm careful when I talk about stuff like blood and also stuff around the heart, because I know for people, the heart can hold lots of really deep emotions for people that aren't always known to the body mind system until you kind of go, oh, whoa, and people get into their heart and they're like, well, but I think it's really cool for people to know that the heart's not a pump. It doesn't pump anything. If it was going to be a pump, it'd be as big as your house. It's this beautiful spiralizing, refreshing organ that spins your blood and just kind of gives it a little effervescent spin and then sends it off around your body. But blood, I do know people get squeamish about blood, and sometimes when I'm teaching anatomy, or I've got to just be really mindful and listen to what I'm saying as well, because I find all the gory stuff just fascinating, but I know some people just do not find it fascinating at all. So it's like, how does it relate back to what we're doing? And it might be that you're just talking about, hey, we've got all these fluids in our body. Some of them are in like your blood vessels, some of them are outside your blood vessels, and all the fluid does different things. So can we embody a practice that's a fluid practice at the moment and kind of go from that? Or bones kind of give you that different quality as well. Muscles are always doing something. And I think it's really fun for people to find out that you've got muscles everywhere, and you've got these really tiny, fine muscles that do these really tiny, fine movements. And we've got these really huge muscles that do these big kind of huge movements, but it's never just one muscle. It's everything's happening at the same time. So I can't not teach without talking about anatomy.
It sounds
my
like
favorite thing to do.
sounds like you're tying the qualities of some of the different anatomical structures to potential movement qualities that people could embody. Did I hear you right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Or, you know, the thing of having your attention in one place. So if you could have your attention up in your head for a whole movement practice and imagine your brain kind of swishing around in its fluid up there, or getting high, how would that change how you do your forward fold? Or how would that change how you rolled your head on the floor or something? You know, I think that that's quite cool for people to explore, because it means in yoga and in somatics, Hanna style, we repeat stuff. We do a lot of repetition. You know, I don't teach anything new probably for the last 8 years. I'm repeating the stuff, but it's our awareness and how we kind of have that conversation with what we're doing. That's where that freshness and that newness comes from. And then I think that I'm really interested in how can we give all those, just have more possibilities for things. I want 100 ways to lift my arm up. I don't just want one way to lift my arm up. So I want to be able to have my focus in my foot as I lift my arm and notice what's going on there as well, down in the foot as my arm lifts.
So you mentioned something that I was planning to bring up, because if people take a look at your Instagram, they'll see you in your practice, but it seems like, I don't know, it seems like 60, 70% of your practice, at least from the, you know, the images is outside. You're out in nature. You're often with, is it Indiana Biscuit? Is your dog?
Yeah, Indy. Yeah, my dog, yes.
But so one of the images that I saw today, and we were talking about the anatomy of the lungs and the alveoli, but you had shared a picture, and I don't know what kind of berries they were, but they were berries on some kind of a vine, and you were talking about the alveoli inside the body. And I've seen a comparison between the lungs and a head of broccoli before, for example. But more than just the anatomical or structural connections, what's the value for you, you know, in your time outside in terms of your practice?
Good question. I mean, being inside's cool, isn't it? The floor's flat, the walls are flat. You've got the climate, is you can adjust the climate and all that. So it's not safe is not the right word. It's more of a controlled environment being inside, isn't it? Once you're outside, you're then part of the bigger picture, so to speak. And I love trees. Trees are like one of my favorite things. And I just find it so satisfying, so nourishing to my body systems to be with trees. One of my favorite sounds is wind moving through trees on a windy day, just that kind of swishy sound. And I imagine that kind of sound of, you know, as your food goes down your digestive tract, or that kind of swishy, or those little hairs just kind of pushing it down. And so for me, being outside, what that adds to me is I'm walking my dog quite often. So I'm like, okay, walking after half an hour, I need to stop and just do some different movements and free up my knees and my hips a little bit, or do some foot stuff. And so I normally just am totally narcissistic and chuck my camera down and take a picture of myself as well for Instagram. But I think the value of being outside is you're responding to what nature is doing, and nature's like our body. It's always doing something different. Every moment is slightly different. You know, the wind's moving in a different way, the sunlight's coming in a different way, and the ground's normally uneven and wobbly, which is really cool. And so for me, in summer, I prefer to be outside practicing. In winter, when the ground's a bit wet like it is now in New Zealand, it's not as easy. So it's more kind of standing stuff that I'll be doing outside. But it's just that interaction with that energy, if I can go there, from trees and plants. And so it just feels to me like you're more part of the bigger thing that we're in, that kind of outer cosmos. But hey, a nice, clean, solid floor is great to roll around on.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yoga, moving at the beach is not fun. I remember I went to Rarotonga or somewhere, and I had this romantic idea of, you know, doing yoga on the beach, and it's going to be all lovely. And then you're there and the sand's blowing in your face, and there's little sand skippers jumping on you, and some people walking past watching, and it's like, actually, this is not that great, being in the middle of like a bush or the forest or out in a big field, yeah, it's kind of more fun than the beach for me. Yeah, trees are just, I think we don't give trees enough credit. They're very similar to us in the way that they work, and they have family members, and they, feed each of their family and look after each other and are like friends. And yeah, I think they're just an amazing thing. So if I can be around trees and move, cool, really happy, Haidee.
I actually read this book last year. I don't know if you read it, The Overstory, which is all about, it's a novel, and the main characters are essentially the trees. It's I'll share, I think it's I hope I'm getting this right. I hope it's Richard Powers, but I think that's the author's name. I'll double check it and correct myself if I need to in the caption. But yeah, he just has this incredible awe of trees that comes through in the way that he writes. But in connection with something that we were talking about earlier, also trees clearly have a different relationship to time than we do. And they have, we might only see the stillness, and yet they are moving, but they're just moving on a scale of time, that we're not quite aware of. So
absolutely, yeah. And they say that trees are shaped by the wind that moves around them, and so I think that in our bodies as well, that we're shaped by the fluid and the blood that moves around us. Our body grows around our blood, basically, and so that's that parallel. It's like there's just, are you being shaped by your inner environment, or are you shaping it? And that's kind of some cool questions to think about, because most people are just shoving in, food and whatever and not sleeping, and it's like you're actually shaping you're forcing your body, rather than, can I just let all of its processes come forth? My stomach's telling me I'm hungry, cool, I'll go eat. My lower back's telling me I really need to actually just lie on the floor right now. So I'm shaping my life based on those things. My body's talking to me. And we've got much more nerves coming up from our body to our brain that's working everything else and kind of dealing with it, than the brain's sending back. So it's this, I think it's a real shame that people don't listen to the messages their bodies send them more often. My knee's sore. I'll just go for that big walk up that hill. Well, yeah, okay, that might improve it, and we do need to move, but maybe your knee's just really asking you just to rest today, or put it up on a pillow or something. And I think the more you get sensitive to those body processes and the information that your body's sending back to you or is talking to you, the greater, I don't know, just everything seems to get easier and more clearer, and you just get more fine-tuned with yourself. So when you walk into a room, don't like that feeling in that room, that's your body actually telling you to just turn around and walk back out. It's not, they're not people you want to be with, or it's something, I don't know, just it could be anything, but it means that you're greater sensitivity to yourself and how you meet other people as well, which I think is really important, and other things, animals, nature included.
It's, a lot of times movement practice, or maybe even a contemplative practice, there is this sense of emphasizing an internal listening. And I think you're right that for many people that isn't so much part of their experience. But it also occurs to me that at a certain point, we can almost become too internal. And it's also, as you say, I might be getting signals from inside my body, but it also has to do with the way my body is reading the environment. And so this is something that I've become particularly interested in, and maybe this would be a good chance to bring up a topic that everyone's been thinking about, but that being the experience, that the world has been going through the last 15 months or so of the pandemic. And I wonder how you've experienced this change in the relationship with the environment around you, the reduced interaction with other people. How has your practice served you, or how has the situation challenged your practice? What's it been like for you through this period?
Yeah, well, we're pretty lucky down here in New Zealand. We're basically back to normal. We don't have hardly any restrictions, and we can gather in as many people as we want. We can touch people how we want. We're suggested to wear masks on buses, and that's about it. But I think at the beginning, there was a lot of that fear thing, and people kind of, someone walks beside you and it's like, oh my God, they walked into my space kind of thing. For me, as I'm a little bit of an introvert, I found that quite nice. I was like, oh, people aren't like coming close to me in the supermarket, and people are giving space. And when you queue up, there's not someone like right behind you in the queue. So for me, I'm like, this is quite cool. We get a bit of space. But I didn't, in my own body systems, I could feel that little bit of stress and that little bit of fear about touching people, going out and touching, buying stuff at the supermarket, coming home and wiping everything down and all that kind of stuff. I could feel, I was like, oh, this is having some effects in me. And I found my shoulders getting really tight and my gut getting really tight. And I wasn't giving, and because my brain was more focusing on kind of that, what's happening out there in the world thing, and that fear response for my own personal practice, I found it really, really hard to just lie down on the floor and do some movements. It was like, no, I'm hyper vigilant. I actually need to be out. And so walking was a really good thing for me at that time when we were in our lockdown. So walking was really good. And I took all those elements of, can I be in my body? Can I find ease in my body with walking? But I saw after we got to come back to yoga and our group movement practices, there was a lot of, you could sense it in people. They didn't want to get too close, and they were a little bit cautious about it. And I think it's slowly coming back to normal here. People aren't as cautious and people are touching and that sort of thing again. But I didn't like that thing of people there's that external authority that's telling you to be scared of something, and rightly so. But I just felt like people don't have the tools to deal with uncertainty, because there was lots of change at that time as well. And then, oh my God, I can't even go and hang out with my friends, or I'm stuck with my family for 6 weeks or 6 months or whatever it is. And those challenges that arose from that. I think society will probably be different forever. Will probably culturally be different forever from now on. But it also gives us a really good chance to look at what we were doing before and compare it to what we can now maybe possibly start doing again, and go, okay, so what are all the things that we didn't like about it? Let's let those go, and let's encourage all those things we do like. Like, I never really liked hugging people before. And now when I have the opportunity to hug people, I'm like, I'm totally into this hug. Like, it's been quite a change for me like that, because you couldn't just hug random people, not that you're hugging random people, but sometimes in the yoga world, there's a bit of hugging that goes on. And now it's like, I really there's something quite special about those times that you get to be close to people. When I work one-on-one with people and you get to put your hands on them, it's like, this is really special. There's parts of the world that still aren't able to do this. And there was a time where we didn't know if we would be able to do this again and put our hands on each other. So yeah, it's been a very challenging time. And I had some big stress responses in my body afterwards as well, that affected my heart. And I had to really have a good look at how I was dealing with stress and uncertainty, and around that. And I think that's been a really good thing for me. And I've only come out better off for it, and going through some of those more grittier, stickier places.
Yeah, it seems like this has been a time where, aside from the practical everyday changes that people had to deal with, it's been, maybe for better or worse, but unavoidably a time to reassess, what's important, what's meaningful, what's valuable. And I mean, of course, what you and I do, teaching movement, suddenly all the movement teachers were online. But I think that maybe, a lot of people discovered that the value of a movement practice during this period.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And that online thing was funny, wasn't it? It was like, I don't like this. I don't like teaching to my cans of baked beans behind me on the shelf or whatever, you know, looking past your camera at whatever's behind you. And also it felt like there was some kind of sacredness taken away from the movement practice, because my cats are there, my dogs are there, my kids are there, my partner's there. And it's like, oh, but this is like my time to like teach. And, you know, when you go to like a studio, it's like all nice and set up and quiet and that. And it was like, oh, you're being a little bit spoiled there, Haidee. It's like this is real life. You have to be at home and you have to kind of carve out that little bit of what it is, and you got to do the thing. And I totally agree with you. I think what's been helpful about it is people have really, they know the value now of, oh, I couldn't get to the gym for those 8 weeks or whatever it is, or I couldn't get to the yoga class. Whoa, I can now feel those impacts on my life from not doing that regular movement practice. And the online thing was okay, wasn't it? But it just wasn't the same. But in the same kind of sentence, the online thing for some people is really great. And it's great that people have now got that possibility that they can go, cool, I can just hook into stuff and do stuff at home, or I can listen, because lots of the Feldenkrais and somatics, Hanna Somatics stuff you do, it's an audio. So you don't necessarily go to a class, you actually do it by yourself at home anyway. But that external, doing your own practice is so much more challenging without someone guiding you than having an audio or a visual or whatever, isn't it? It's just, it becomes you've got to be really dedicated to get on the ground and spend half an hour or an hour moving around or standing or whatever your practice is. If you go somewhere and someone else is guiding you, it's like someone's made a meal for you. You didn't have to think about it. You just turn up, you eat it, you get satisfied, you leave again. So there's been some, really interesting insights. We started a yoga teacher training online during our first lockdown in New Zealand as well. And it was cool, but it was nothing like being with people, and just that resonance you get from being in the same room with a whole group of people moving and that kind of thing as well. But yeah, I found online teaching really challenging. And because you've got to do the whole bloody thing, and you've got to watch yourself the whole time as well, which you don't normally do when you teach. It's like, I don't want to see myself moving the whole time. It's kind of, I'd rather look out and see other people's bodies.
Yeah, online is a different thing. I'm actually still teaching quite a fair amount online, but yeah, I'm starting to see people in my studio. And I remember the first person that I was with and did the hands-on work, sure, I was doing all the things that I'm trained to do, but the first session, it seemed like the impact was just based on, here we are, we're actually making contact, and that there was something really profound about that. You brought up something that maybe it's just interesting to me, even separate than the question of the pandemic, but the challenge for someone to essentially be in charge of their own practice as compared to being guided. And of course, we all benefit from guidance and from teachers and from those, who have more experience or expertise than we do. But at the same time, as you were saying earlier, every person is different and needs to find their own way. So I'm just curious, because I feel like this is a really, and this is something that I talk to often with clients about. There are some people who will come to a movement class and you have the impression that until they come next week, there's no other activity that constitutes a practice. But then again, as you say, some people may not really have a sense of what can I do. So I wonder, and maybe this has come up with your students, but if someone begins, their journey just by discovering yoga class and coming and following the teacher, what would you say to someone about, how they could begin to develop their own personal practice beyond just attending a class?
That's a good question, isn't it? Because there's got to be that attitude of willingness to do it as well. So like you said, there's going to be those people that's what they do, and the only other movement they might do is moving from their car to work, and then their work to home, or their daily life or whatever, which is completely fine. I hope that some people find time to walk and that kind of thing. But how do you start a personal practice? So I think it's once again about knowing you've got to know a little bit of, we've got to have that awareness about yourself and what you might need on the day or the moment that you kind of get there. So Sam Lowe, a colleague, a teacher friend, she does something called a weather reading, which is just sit down or lie down and just do a little simple weather reading and kind of go through yourself. How am I? How am I feeling? How's my body feeling? How am I breathing? How's my emotional status? And just whatever answers come up to that. It's just like when you watch the weather report, you can't change if it rains or it's sunny. You just got to kind of go with what's there. And just based on that little weather reading or that weather report, that might start to give you some idea about how you're going to start moving. So it might be like, whoa, I've got heaps of energy today. Okay, I'm going to get up and start standing and maybe, you know, moving my arms up and down with my breath, or I'm going to lie down and start rolling my head or start pushing my feet to the floor and lifting my pelvis up and down. I think a really, really good shape to start from is knees and hands. So that kind of shape where you've got your hands down, you've got your knees down, and you can just start moving your spine and doing some of those yoga-y kind of cat-cow things, and just see where it takes you and what your body needs. You know, everyone, when people come into a yoga class, for example, or somatics class, I say, you know, how's everyone feeling? Some people, oh man, my shoulders are really tight today. And so it's like, if that's what you get from your weather reading, start doing some movements that are going to start to bring some movement into your shoulders. Oh, my pelvis feels really sore. Start doing some movements that might start to bring some ease into that. So that's how I would encourage people to start their movement practice. There's no time limit to it, because I think that's what puts people off is, I've got to do an hour of yoga a day, or I've got to do an hour of whatever. It's like, if I've got, sometimes some days, if I'm lucky, I've got 5 minutes, I'll just do that. I'm like, what do I feel like doing? Cool. It might be a couple of down dogs. It might be lying down doing some arch and flattens on the floor. Then if I have longer, that might progress into something else or whatever. So there's no time limit. There's no rules. And the only thing is the more that you do it, the more you're probably going to want to do it. So the hardest thing about starting a movement practice is starting. Once you've started, just keep on going. And that's what I say. I teach beginners. I'm like, now you've started this journey, just keep going. Keep coming to the classes if you need to, or start doing your own little bit of practice at home. Start doing some cat-cows, throw a down dog in there, stand up, lift your arms up and down a couple of times. There's your yoga practice. So it's this getting out of this idea of yoga or movement or whatever modality you're in has to look a certain way, and go a little bit further into that. And what are the principles of yoga? Well, it's breathing, it's moving with awareness, and it's encouraging ease in the body. That's really the top 3 things I could think about for movement, and that would apply to walking or running or whatever it is. It's like, can I bring those principles in? And then it might look like yoga or it might not look like yoga, but it's your practice and it's your movement practice. And I think that's what's really important, because then people start to become their own teachers, and by becoming their own teachers, then the whole kind of thing starts to open up for them. And I've still got my teachers, and I think it's really important to have teachers that you can go back and touch in with and get inspired from and have their practice delivered to you. But it's very, very nourishing to know what you need to do to get out of pain or discomfort, or just to be able to move every day, which is, look, your lymph loves movement. Just move around, man. Your lymph is going to suck all that up and take all that waste away and bring all that nutrients into all the parts of the body.
You make it sound maybe easier than some people think. There's just an element of improvisation and listening into what you seem to feel that you need. It sounds like a sense of permission that you give yourself, and then that kind of opens the door.
Yeah, it's easy after 20 years of practice.
What about the person who's at the beginning of the road?
Yeah, the person at the beginning of the road, same thing. Just stop, pause, put what you're doing aside. Could just be sitting on your chair. Take 5 breaths. There's your yoga practice for the day. And then, like a little seed, it starts to grow, doesn't it? And it's just that willingness, I think, to grow it and to put your awareness into it and be, I really love that word, enthusiasm. It's like, be enthusiastic about stuff, because wherever you're enthusiastic about, your whole brain and your body's going to go with you. If you're like, oh, I've got to go to yoga again tonight, it's like, yeah. And I used to have this thing, I'd be like pumped to get to yoga when I first started, and I'd get there and then we'd start doing chair poses or something, and it's like, oh, why did I come? Why did I do this to myself? And so there's sometimes in your practice, there are those dips, say, where you're like, oh, I don't really want to be doing this. And it's like, can you just weather those little waves and those days and those weeks and those months that might go on like that, and just be kind to yourself? And then for me, you get to the end of the class and you're like, I love life, I love my body, everything's amazing. And it's so there's fluctuations. There's times where it's going to be easy, and then there's other times where it's like, oh, I just can't even be bothered now. But I think that carrot at the end of the stick, or that piece of chocolate that kind of gets you keeping moving, is everybody knows generally they feel better after movement and breathing. And that's what I really encourage people to find. It's like, find what makes you feel better and find what makes everything feel easier, and just keep bringing your awareness into that and keep exploring that. And there's going to be things that you don't want to do. Yeah, sometimes chair pose, I don't want to do chair pose, but I know it's helpful for some parts of my body sometimes. So you just do the chair pose and find something that feels, and we've all got to go through gritty parts of our life, right? And so if you can be in chair pose and keep breathing and just move through those things, and then know everything's a transient thing and it comes and goes, then I think those are quite cool things to take out into daily life as well.
Yeah, so your movement can show you both kind of like the almost, I don't know, spontaneous or natural pleasures that are just there for the taking, and then it can also show you those places where, you know, something is a real challenge, but there's a deep learning that can come through that, through engaging.
Absolutely.
Well, so, and you were talking about enthusiasm. I was thinking you don't seem to have a problem with that, so I think you model that very well. Maybe there'll be a last couple of words, but before we go, let's make sure to tell people if they would like to connect with you online, or if they're in Auckland, how can they do that?
Yeah, so generally Instagram is a good place to find me. So you can just type in my full name, Haidee Stairmand, or I go under the umbrella of Revel Yoga, which is REVEL Yoga. Facebook has some stuff. I like Instagram better because it's got that visual element to it, and I think humans, we're quite visual creatures, aren't we? And I'm not into reading screeds and screeds of stuff about something unless it's like nerves or, you know, something like that. So that's where you can find me. If you're in Auckland, I teach regularly at a studio called Yoga West. So you can just look up yogawest.co.nz. And that's yoga, and that's somatics, Hanna style as well. And I see loads of people one-on-one with aches, pains, bits and pieces. And I really, really enjoy working one-on-one with people. I think there's something really special about that relationship with just you and another person going on. Yeah, so totally pumped if you want to get in touch with me and we can talk about alveoli or something like that. Yep, absolutely. Always happy to talk about anatomy or support. If you're a beginning teacher or you teacher that wants some support, I do mentor people as well, and just like to give that encouragement to people to go out and be their own teachers as well as teaching other people.
I love that. Great. Any final thoughts you want to share? Anatomy tidbits that we didn't, you haven't revealed yet?
I would say love. This comes from Perry Nicholson. So love your lymph. And lots of people might know him from Stop Chasing Pain. He's a really big inspiration to me.
Can you say the name again? Because I'm not sure. We might have had a slip.
Stop Chasing Pain.
And the teacher you mentioned was?
Dr. Perry Nicholson.
Okay, great.
Yep, so you should be able to find him fairly easily. So his lymph work and his fluid work, amazing stuff. So if you can give your lymph some love, that's breathing nice and easy through your nose at all times. Use your nose for breathing. Give yourself some just light little lymphatic stimulation through some points and move. Get out there and move. And your body will say a big, big thank you to you for that.
Fantastic. Well, big thank you from me to you also for joining me on the podcast today. And, you know, maybe we'll do it again sometime. And I hope people, you know, enjoy your perspective and hopefully get more excited about plunging into their lymph and other parts of their anatomy and getting outside and moving. So this is great.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you so much.
All right. See you soon. Take care.